Good evening, folks. I'm Mary Vlasny, Director of Social Action, and together with Michelle Budreka, who directs our adult formation and has many other roles, we welcome you to the Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist for our evening on the Mystery of Goodness, a Creation Care panel. Thanks for bearing with the struggles and detours of everyday travel here in downtown Rochester. I know we have people from different places. We acknowledge the miracle of healing that goes with our neighborhood, the Mayo Clinic, our neighbor, but growing pains as well. We also welcome those of you who are participating via our live stream, and John, our live stream tech person. I'm grateful to our hospitality ministers who accommodated this event during their regular wine and cheese fellowship time. For those of you who are not familiar with our place, the restrooms are out here. You go toward the outside doors, turn left. Women's is first and the men is second. And I'm also grateful for the presence of our panelists who I will introduce shortly. The beauty of creation is a revelation of God as the source of goodness. This is a quote from Pope Leo XIV. The beauty of creation is a revelation of God as the source of goodness. We live within three relationships, with God, with each other, and with creation, that are foundations of our care for creation. In these relationships, we can find truth, beauty, and goodness. But in our long, loving look at reality, we also lament of how we've failed to protect the beauty and respect the nature of each other and the created world. However, we find hope, as Pope Francis reminds us in Laudato Si, quote, "The urgent challenge to protect our common home includes a concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. The Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes his loving plan or repents of having created us. Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home." Tonight, we hear others speak about how the mystery of goodness manifests itself in science, spirituality, and the work of our daily lives, all interconnected and interwoven in care for the wonder and working of creation, and gratitude to the source for mystery, leading us deeper into mystery. This is another quote from Laudato Si. "It follows that the fragmentation of knowledge and the isolation of bits of information can actually become a form of ignorance unless they are integrated into a broader vision of reality. A vision of our common good and the integrated aspects of that goodness that reveal and call us to protect our common home." And I would invite Father Bob Horahan, our rector, to offer a prayer for our evening together.
Thanks so very much, Mary. Thanks to you and Michelle. Where is Michelle? There she is. For your work in putting this together, and thanks to all of you for participating tonight. It's a great joy to be able to host this event at St. John's and to deepen all of our appreciation for the beauty of creation and the manifestation of God's glory that comes through it. So we'll begin by taking a moment to call to mind. I'm about to show my roots in the Lasallian tradition from St. Mary's, we'll call to mind we're in the holy presence of God. Loving and gracious Father, through whom we know the care that you lavish upon us, we praise and thank you for the gift of creation, which manifests your glory. We thank you for the many opportunities that you give to us to be enriched, to be lifted up by the beauty of the world around us. We cry out to you with sorrow for the ways in which we have failed to reverence that beauty, but we know that through your Son you renew all things, and you give us the opportunity to begin anew. We ask you to bless our gathering this evening, help it to be an opportunity for us to savor more deeply the continuing care that you give to each and every one of us, the continuing gift that you give to us and the beauty of creation, and help us to respond to the call to be responsible stewards after the model of Christ your Son, through whom we pray, he who is Lord, forever and ever. Amen.
So is the key back there or not? Yeah. Okay. It just wasn't there, so you think that's what happened? Yes. I know that because the color, it wasn't together. Okay. It's always there.
Our first speaker will be Dr. Amy Christensen,
Yeah, that's what's happening.
who is an atmospheric chemist whose expertise lies in global chemical transport modeling. She holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of California, Irvine, and completed a postdoctoral appointment at the University of Montana. In September of 2022, she joined the School of Science and Engineering at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, as an assistant professor of chemistry. Dr. Christensen's research interests focus on long-term atmospheric measurements and modeling to understand how pollutant concentrations, distribution, and impacts have changed over time. Her favorite science is that which connects the chemical to the human, exploring the connections between atmospheric chemistry and climate change, public health, and environmental justice. Dr. Christensen sits on the Climate Data Guide Board of Advisors for the National Center for Atmospheric Research, serves on the American Geophysical Union Early Career Committee, and is a contributing scientist to the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe's Task Force on Hemispheric Transport of Air Pollution. If you would welcome Dr. Amy Christensen.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here tonight, so thank you for hosting me, allowing me to be part of this panel. The introduction made me sound like a very scary, intimidating person, and I promise you that I'm not. I'm actually quite friendly. One of my favorite things to do is to talk about science with people, whether or not you have a scientific background, no matter if you're a chemist, if you're working something completely different. Doesn't matter to me. I just love talking about science. So I want to share a little bit about my background, how I came to be here, and sort of what inspires me to continue to do the work that I do. So it starts, back when I was growing up. I grew up here in Rochester, went to high school at Mayo High School, graduated back in 2011. That's actually where I met Michelle, one of the organizers of this panel. We met in a Latin class that we were taking together. So when she asked me if I would be willing to be a part of this panel tonight, that was a very easy yes for me to say. I got to get to do one of the things I love to do, which is talk to people about science, and then get to help out a friend as well. So I've kind of always been interested in science, and I think that comes down to what my parents did for work. My dad's an electrical engineer, and my mom worked as an RN. And so being interested in science is something that just kind of came naturally to me. And so I was very fortunate as I was growing up to have a lot of mentors who were very interested in continuing me on that path. So after I finished high school, I went to Gustavus Adolphus College, where I double majored in chemistry and environmental studies. I was originally just intending to do chemistry because I thought chemistry was cool and I wanted to do more with that. But I ended up taking this class my first year that was called Geochemistry of the Environment. And that's when I started to see how chemistry can help us explain what's going on in the environment. It helps us understand how we can clean up the environment, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so that's really what inspired me to, go sort of more the environmental route than, what I had maybe originally been intending, kind of more a synthesis type route. And so as I was in my undergrad, I managed to get a few different research experiences that made me realize that this is something that I can actually contribute. I can contribute to scientific knowledge. I can maybe even make a difference. So I started off looking at water chemistry, which is a little bit removed from what I do now. So I was looking at heavy metals in water systems up in northern Minnesota, things that have been impacted by acid mine drainage, right? So all these pollutants coming out of open taconite mining. And so we were tracking, okay, where do these heavy metals actually go? Where do they end up in biological systems? What kind of concentrations are we looking at? And so that was a very cool project to be a part of. However, I had started learning more about climate change at this point, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I don't want to stay in water. I'd like to do something a little bit closer connected to climate. So it was around that time that I was taking an environmental chemistry class, and that's when I really learned about the connection between chemistry and climate, which I'd never really realized was there before. But it makes sense. Everything we see going on in the climate system, right, is because of molecules in the air, the way that they interact with light, and the way that they interact with different types of radiation, and so it can explain everything that we see. I wanted to continue down that path. So I got into a little bit more research looking at something called photochemistry, so that's just how are molecules transformed when they're hit by light. And so I did this in a couple different contexts, one of them looking at degradation of herbicides. How do they break down under sunlight? What sort of products do they make? Are those products toxic? Do they get into water systems? Do they get into biological systems? And that was a really interesting project that took me over to France. So this was just part of a summer that I spent in France at the University of Clermont-Ferrand. I'm sorry I butchered that pronunciation for anyone that speaks French. I'm terrible at it. But we worked with a professor there who had access to some really cool instrumentation where we could get more of a mechanistic idea of how things were breaking down under sunlight. And so that was, a very transformative experience for me in that I could see how this larger university system worked and how academic science really works. And so that was part of what inspired me to continue my education beyond my undergrad. So after I finished up my undergrad, I really wanted to get into more atmospheric type work. So I applied to a whole bunch of different programs around the country, and I ended up finding this one professor at Rutgers University, which is in New Jersey, who was doing this really cool project looking at cloud water. And so I got in contact with her and eventually, ended up being offered a position in her lab. So moved out to New Jersey and was actually in an atmospheric science program. So I was learning more about how does the atmospheric system work? How do we measure things in the atmosphere? Learn more about the climate, learn about things like satellites and how we sense things from space. So that was a very cool experience for me. And really kind of, I realized at that point that this is what I want to do. Now I was only there for like a year. Because at that point my advisor decided to take a different position at a different university. So that's how I ended up following her to California, went to the University of California, Irvine, this time in a chemistry department. And my project changed focus a little bit. So what I ended up doing for my PhD work was a little bit different than what I expected to do. So I got a little bit more into the modeling side of things. So when I say modeling, I'm talking about large numeric models. So these are things we run on supercomputers. They just do a bunch of math that you wouldn't want to do by hand. You could, but why would you, right? Someone can do it for you. And so what I was looking at were these tiny, tiny particles in the atmosphere. It's called particulate matter. And this has a very interesting chemical composition, which all influences the way that it uptakes water, it influences cloud formation, influences precipitation, influences climate. And so I was looking specifically how certain types of organic molecules, so things that have lots of carbon in them, how they uptake water and contribute to this. And so my entire thesis work is based on modeling those processes, and then making some estimates about the way that this might impact the atmospheric system around us. So my PhD work is something that I did that for my PhD and then was looking to kind of change tracks a little bit. So for my postdoc, I went more heavily into the modeling side of things, but this time looking at ozone. So here I'm talking about ground level ozone. We breathe that in, it makes us very, very sick. So we want to reduce ozone concentrations. And so I worked on improving model simulations, getting different observational constraints in there to kind of make those predictions better. So that was at the University of Montana, spent a couple years there, then was applying to faculty positions around the country. So I landed in Kansas City, who ended up giving me a job. And so now I both teach and I run a research lab. So my main teaching thing is environmental chemistry. That's the main courses that I teach. So I like to teach students about the atmosphere, water systems, soils, all the different contaminants. How do we measure them? How do we look at their impacts? And I find that to be a really fulfilling thing. There's a lot of students that just take it because it seems, it's an elective, it fits in their schedule, they don't really know if they care about it. And I get to watch as they learn more about the world around them and the way it's influenced by chemistry, and how it really does influence our understanding of various different systems, whether it's climate or water, the oceans, anything. And so seeing them make those connections in their head, and sometimes it inspires them as well to go into an environmental line of work, and I just find that to be a very fulfilling thing. My research is still in the atmosphere. So I still run a modeling lab, so we do mostly computational work. We work on improving model simulations using various constraints. We have projects right now that are looking at agricultural emissions. So there's a lot of things within agriculture that influence the way that particles form, but we just don't know enough about it to really have a good idea of what sort of impact is that having. So we're looking at making that process a little bit better known. We also have a project that's looking at environmental justice concerns that are local to Kansas City. So that's another thing that's really important to me. It's this community that I'm coming into, and I should try to leave that community better than where I found it, right? And so we've been looking a little bit more into pollution disparities that fall along racial and socioeconomic lines. And that gives us an idea about, okay, where can we make improvements, right? So we've been doing a bunch of modeling, trying to figure out what's causing disparities in air quality, because we do see them along racial lines. And this leads to increases in things like asthma that also fall along racial lines. So figuring out where that pollution comes from is the first step in fixing it. So that's been a really important piece of work that I'm quite passionate about. And then one of the other things that I'm doing a little bit on the side, it sounded very intimidating when it was introduced on this United Nations task force. I promise I'm not that cool. I'm just doing some model simulations for them. We're working at revising some air quality policies over the European Union domain. And so I'm just doing some model simulations for that. But that's also a very cool project in that, the work that I'm doing is going to directly influence policy decisions. And so that's really what inspires me to keep coming back and doing the work, because this work, it's not always easy, right? It can be very isolating. You're just sitting in your research office, writing a manuscript, writing a grant, writing code late into the night, and that can be a very isolating experience. But just knowing that those things that I produce can go on to make people's lives better, that's really, that inspiring factor. So I've got the students that I inspire, hopefully, and then putting out something into the world that could be of use. I think it's very easy for academics, sort of in the ivory tower, to do things that might never see the light of day. So I'm very fortunate to be in a position where the things that I do could translate into real world action. So that's my main motivation for being here. That's my background. I'm sorry it was so academic in nature, but I am who I am, so. So I'm hoping that to the panel tonight I can bring a couple different perspectives, one of course being the science one, right? Questions that you have about how the climate system works, observations we use, models that we use, how do we interpret things, how do we come at this from a scientific place of understanding. I'm hoping that I can help share that knowledge with you and help you understand it more. Also, I like to think that I come with a sort of educational component as well. I think sometimes people, they want to talk to other people about climate change, but they maybe don't know how, right? And so I talk to a lot of people every semester who are curious about it, who maybe don't know much about it. And so hopefully I can provide some insights into starting those conversations, especially if people, sometimes can be a little bit combative about it, right? And so we have to approach things carefully sometimes. So I hope I can bring that perspective as well. All right, I hope I didn't speak for too long. Thank you so much for letting me be on this panel tonight. I'm excited to get into things.
Thank you, Dr. Christensen, and especially for your curiosity. I think that has led you to a lot of places, and I imagine it will lead you further. There's no doubt about that. So our next speaker is Sister Dawn Noteware. She is a Franciscan sister and a doctorate, a Rochester, Minnesota Franciscan sister, is the Erica and Harry John Family Professor Emerita of Catholic Theological Ethics at the Catholic Theological Union, a graduate school of theology and ministry in Chicago, Illinois. The mandate of the John Family Chair is to promote the Roman Catholic consistent ethic of life advanced by Cardinal Bernardin. Her research and teaching include the ethics of power and racial justice and fundamental moral theology. However, her primary focus is environmental ethics through the lens of Franciscan theology, especially the effects of today's climate emergency on poor people. I'm hearing a connection here. Of equal concern is the religion-science dialogue. She was a project leader for an AAAS DOSER grant that enabled CTU to integrate the science-religion dialogue in all of its theology and ethics courses. She serves as a grant proposal evaluator for the Climate Science in Theological Education Initiative with American Association for the Advancement of Science Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion, which relates back to all those letters that I talked about a moment ago. That program enables theology schools to integrate the science-religion dialogue in their curriculum, which is interesting because I had this conversation about that happening at Lourdes High School here in town. Since 2015, she's been a consultant for the Laudato Si Encyclical Working Group of the Office of Human Dignity of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Her most recent book is Franciscan Writings, Hope Amid Ecological Sin and Climate Emergency. I ask you to help us welcome Sister Dawn.
I'm going to use a script because with all of that, I have to stay focused. Anyway, I am a Franciscan, and so I speak from my heart as much as I possibly can. So the first part of this, you're going to hear a little poetic. It was a quiet late May evening in Windham, my small southwestern Minnesota hometown. Having finished planting our large vegetable garden, I sat with my mother on the back steps of our 3-bedroom stucco house, sipping ice-cold lemonade. The newly planted garden was but a short distance away. The air was moist with the scent of the recently turned soil, seasoned with wisps of sweetness from freshly mowed grass, and the piney scent of the tall spruce trees artfully placed about the yard. Through the lacy pine branches, the late evening sky signaled day's impending end with shades of pinkish red-orange and contrasting shades of gray. The soft, high-pitched insect chorus lulled us into restful meditation. Then, spontaneously harmonizing with the peaceful flow, came my mother's words, "Only God can make the garden grow." Those faith-filled words stirred up something deep within me, but my 12-year-old self could not quite name it. So I just held on to those in silence for many years. Indeed, my adolescent persona required a certain kind of rebellion at being forced to help weed, tend, and harvest the garden produce. But secretly, I loved working in the garden. I was quite awestruck by the fact that you could put this hard, flat, little yellow thing in the ground, and weeks later, you could find a sweet corn plant in its place. It was only some 30 years later that I would be able to name what had so deeply moved me that evening. I grew up in Windham, Minnesota. My mother was a Missouri Synod Lutheran preacher's kid, the oldest daughter of a family of 7. Her father was a minister in northern Minnesota, and the Red Lake Native American Reservation was part of his territory. Mom's love for the pine forests inspired annual family camping trips into those environs. My father was the oldest of 5 boys growing up on a hog farm in South Dakota during the 1930s Depression. Having sold their hogs at 3 cents a head, they lost their farm and moved to Gaylord, Minnesota, where my grandfather took a job as a school janitor. Thus, in our household, self-sufficiency was the continual mantra, intermixed with awe, wonder, and alertness to the constant, boundless love of God, lavishly displayed in creation. Any abuse of God's creation was sacrilege and idolatry. Thus, for me, care for God's creation was simply one highly significant aspect of living the Christian life. When I was in 8th grade, the science curriculum focused on earth sciences. I eagerly absorbed the scientific explanations accompanying the visible marvels of the created world. But my enthusiasm was dampened by a misguided male teacher who mocked my enthusiasm. When I proposed a project for the science fair, he refused to sign my entry form because, quote, "girls don't win science fairs." Fortunately, my religious faith sustained me, and I've been blessed to serve the church and the world in several ways. After completing doctoral studies in theological and environmental ethics in 1999, I was invited to join the faculty of Catholic Theological Union, a graduate school of theology and ministry in Chicago. Then in 2004, I received a canonical mandatum from the late Cardinal George to teach theological ethics. Thus, for 20 years, I've taught seminarians and ministerial students from across the globe while also being involved in science and religion dialogues, both ecumenical and interreligious, in several parts of the globe. On several occasions, I've been invited to my students' countries of origin to lend support for their ministries. With the 2015 publication of Laudato Si, I served the Archdiocese of Chicago as an advisor to Cardinal Cupich on its implementation. In 2019, I received a $100,000 grant from the American Association for the Advancement of Science to integrate the dialogue on science, ethics, and religion into all 9 curricular areas of the School of Theology. Our American Association assigned science advisor for preparing the grant, and I'm going to stumble over this but he's a beautiful man. It's Professor V. Rahadrama Ranathan, better known as Ram. He's Hindu and Indian. And so anyway, but he was Professor Emeritus at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography for the University of California, San Diego, and a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. The lessons we learned together were invaluable. Indeed, creation care is scientifically, theologically, and morally necessary. Now, from my youth, I have been motivated by the beauty and wonder of God's creation, and I long to nurture it. But today, I'm also motivated by a healthy moral outrage. When visiting my former ministerial students, I have seen our brothers and sisters in Christ currently suffering the irreparable effects of global warming. In Chicago's South Side, 3- and 4-year-olds suffer from asthma, the result of breathing the industrial pollution. Western corporate manufacturers are draining wells in African villages and slowly ravaging the lives of women and girls who daily travel miles for minimal amounts of potable water. The destruction of irreparable Amazonian forests in Colombia, resulting from pasture expansion for cattle. We like to have our beef. Illicit crops, illegal mining, and unregulated infrastructure development. For decades, we in the U.S. have known what is necessary to halt global warming, but we have once again allowed our government to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords and much more. In short, I am over the top passionate. We are killing off God's creation. So what can we do? We can carpool. Most of the pollution comes from the transportation sector. We need to use public transportation that makes possible things and are structured such that they are useful and practical, and that we need to park our cars. We have some 20 Catholic social teaching documents that guide our Catholic understanding of social, political, economic, environmental, and personal ethics toward policies that are fully life-giving and life-saving. Yet how many of us have actually known that they exist, and how many of us have read Laudato Si? Two major Catholic resources are the U.S. Catholic Climate Covenant and the International Laudato Si movement. Both have excellent, very practical materials that can guide Catholic action toward creation and care that is really effective toward making differences. And they've got wonderful websites. I'll give you the addresses if you're interested. We know what is necessary. We simply need to think globally and act locally. Many practical changes do make real differences. There are numerous ways that we can change. We've done quick turnarounds before, and we can likely do this again. We've created the atom bomb, space exploration, HIV/AIDS, COVID. We can do things like this again. And most importantly, vote, support our democracy, demand restoration and funding for the EPA, national forests, and database science. St. Francis of Assisi, the patron of ecology, taught us that the entire natural world is sacramental, overflowing with signs of God, our Creator. Francis did not seek God in cathedrals or extravagant liturgies. Rather, in a manner of a great forensic scientist who sees evidence of the identity of a particular person in their footprint, St. Francis saw God in God's creation as holding and declaring the very nature and the heart of God. Today, the footprints of Christ are covered over and forgotten. The challenge before us is to calculate our own individual ecological footprint and then work diligently to reduce our destructive activities and restore as best we can the beauty and the magnificence of God's creation. We must do that following in the footprints of Jesus. Thank you.
Reminded again how we can be influenced by our upbringing. So many ways. Thank you, Sister Dawn. Next, we'll hear from Chloe Brzezinski, who initially came into the Catholic Church and found her interest in caring for the environment while she was in college. After discovering the concept of care for creation, she became passionate about the intersection of these two facets in her life. Chloe has a master's degree in global change management, and her work specializes in calculating the greenhouse gas emissions of various organizations. She lives in Winona with her husband and 2 sons. Please welcome Chloe Brzezinski.
There we go. Okay. All right. Hi, yeah, my name's Chloe. Thank you so much, Mary, for inviting me here today. So I guess I'll kind of start with my background. As Mary mentioned in my bio, I came to the Catholic Church when I was in college. All 4 of my grandparents are Catholic, and so I was baptized as an infant because that's what you do. But neither of my parents were practicing, so it was when I was a senior in college that my now husband, then boyfriend, who was raised in a mixed household, Lutheran and Catholic, brought me to a Lutheran Bible study, and that's when I became a Christian and immediately knew that the Catholic Church was where I belonged. So over the course of college, I learned more about the Catholic faith and completed RCIA when I was a senior. Kind of in the meantime, I was studying at St. Olaf College, biology and Latin, and my biology degree was focused kind of more on like the medical side of things. I wasn't super into the environment yet. I thought all of environmental science was just like plant biology, and I thought that was boring. But when I was a junior, I watched a documentary about plastic and how plastic is affecting our environment and our health. And so this was over a decade ago. And already it wasn't mainstream, but it was something that we were aware of. And that's when I got really into the kind of like zero waste sphere at the time, which was just brand new, very like crunchy granola, kind of like off the deep end people who didn't wash their hair or whatever. But yeah, through college, my faith and my interest in the environment were very separate. I didn't know that they were related at all. After graduating, I moved to Germany with my husband while he went to school there. And I got my first taste of this very, pedestrian and bike and public transit focused kind of urban structure, minimalist living, and all of the things that are possible in a smaller city of, we lived in a town of about 40,000 people, and that included like the city center plus kind of a suburb. But it still had this robust bus system and a train station where we could be in Munich in an hour, or could get on we'd go into Munich and then we could get on a train that could take us anywhere in the country or could take us to Austria for a day trip, all with public transportation. And so then When our oldest son was born, we came back to the United States and we lived in Sleepy Eye, which is a little town near New Ulm. And while I was there, I had the amazing experience of connecting really deeply with my faith. There's a very rich Catholic community in that town. But at the same time, I have this baby boy, and I'm thinking about the world that we're creating, thinking about what his future is going to look like, and seeing these wasteful lifestyles all around me. Working in a place that wasn't even recycling paper. I didn't even know that there were still places that didn't recycle paper. And so it was while living there that I made the decision to go back to school and get my master's degree in global change management at the University for Sustainable Development in Eberswalde, Germany. So we decided to move back to Germany, this time to a city near Berlin. And again, town of 40,000 people, trains everywhere. We lived in the city center. We could walk everywhere, take a bus to the train station. Again, lived there 2 years with no car. And my program focused on nature conservation and policy, and thinking about systems, social systems and environmental systems on a global scale, and kind of thinking about the problems that occur in those systems, what's kind of contributing to those problems, and kind of what solutions we might see. And it was during this program that I really leaned into this connectedness between my faith and the environment, and really kind of dived deep into how they're connected and why they're not separate parts of my life, but they are one and the same. So I did this through an internship with the Anglican Diocese of Oxford, England. My program was right smack dab in the middle of COVID, so I had the really fortunate experience of being able to work with the Diocese of Oxford while still being in Germany, and helping their environmental team look at energy usage in parishes, as well as creating resources for some of their rural parishes to help make more environmentally conscious choices, such as learning about what nature ecosystems they have in their churchyard, encouraging biking to church, making more energy efficient appliance purchases, and that kind of thing. And then for my master's thesis, I looked at the theological arguments for care for creation, why this is an integral part of our faith, and then I dove into why and how individual parishes should take action to care for creation. And kind of the bulk of my thesis was a case study where I measured the carbon footprint of the parish that I was attending at the time, which was a really enlightening experience. It was really interesting to kind of see those specific numbers and see, the majority of the carbon footprint came from heating, and electricity wasn't that big of a piece. It was like 10%, but that's something that could be very easily mitigated just by switching to renewable electricity, which is something that was available in that location. But also, purchased goods and services is a huge aspect. Just, all of the things that are being purchased and being consumed, like they have their own carbon footprint that is, the parish as purchasers of those items has a responsibility for. Or I found that their water usage was, even though they had a school that, and I was looking at their water bills were combined with the school, it wasn't during the school year that their water bills were high. It was during the summer when there was nobody using the bathrooms during the day, nobody washing their hands, nobody running the kitchen, but they were watering a soccer field throughout the summer. And that, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it brought them from like the lowest kind of cost tier of water usage up into the highest cost tier of water usage for those summer months. And so it was, just this really interesting experience of really diving deep into how parishes, kind of everyday operations, can have an impact on the environment. And then I put together a plan for helping them prioritize any action that they want to take, from easy changes to improve energy efficiency and engage their parishioners. Oops, I think I bumped this. And reduce their water usage, to larger projects that might be 5-10 years down the line, but they might want to consider investing in. And then now I work as an environmental analyst, doing greenhouse gas inventories for larger organizations. So while I'm not drilling down as deep in there, I get to kind of really hone in on specific aspects of measuring those carbon emissions for the organizations. And it's a really, really interesting work. I love working with data and with spreadsheets. And so that's kind of my perspective that I bring here is, I love my work, but my passion is really for helping churches, especially at the local and individual level, to, I hope to see ecological conversion, as Pope Francis puts it, for all Catholics. I hope to see all of us recognize that we have this obligation to care for the earth that God created and gave to us to be stewards of. And hope that we all recognize God has commanded us to love our neighbor. And that means thinking about how our actions are impacting not just ourselves and our families, but our local communities and our global community. So I hope to see that for all Catholics. And then just personally, what I really like to then, take that ecological conversion and turn it into practice at the local and the individual level. I love looking at greenhouse gas emissions, looking at how we are using fossil fuels in our day-to-day life and at the organizational level, and how can we reduce that? What can we do to reduce our reliance on these fossil fuels and reduce the emissions that we're emitting into the atmosphere? And then also, kind of as a personal note, I still love that zero waste sphere that I found back in college, and just kind of general anti-consumerism in general. So yeah, that's what I kind of hope to bring to the discussion, is kind of just more awareness of our emissions and the waste that we produce.
Thank you, Chloe, for your perspective on the passion that you bring to combining those two, which is really, we're not separate. They're really integrated, and I love the ecological conversion aspect as well. So our concluding panelist will be Jaime Rivera, a parishioner here at the Co-Cathedral, who was born in Moca, Puerto Rico, USA. He's an Eagle Scout and nature and conservation instructor for the Scouts, Boy Scouts of America. He holds a Master of Science in Electrical Biomedical Engineering from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and has worked at NASA, IBM, Pace Electronics, and Benchmark Electronics. Currently, he serves as a certified master inspector at Minnesota's Best Home Inspections, property manager at Eagle Properties, and real estate broker at Dwell Realty Group. He's married to Emily, and together they have 2 children, Liliana, who is 15, and Lucas, who is 10. Jaime.
So the perspective that I bring to the equation is as a design engineer. As an engineer, I integrate everything that the scientist does and everything that the social environment brings and everything that the needs for the people are. So the question is, how do we take all of that we know is the problem, and we would bring it home? And that's where we look at the design. So things work the way that they are designed to work. And if we look at the biggest creation, is the humans. So if God created us and he created everything around us, everything works the way it should be until we start messing around with it a little bit. So when we look at that perspective, is how can we optimize for the design to work the way it should? And that is my perspective on things. How can we take things to see how it was meant to be? Now, obviously, when I was so interested in natural sciences and I was growing up in conservation, I decided to become an electrical engineer. And you say, how do you connect the two? The design, the devices that we use every day are the ones that we carry in our pockets, the ones that we have at home, the ones that are all around us, all the energy systems that are around us. If we can make a tiny little improvement in the thing that we use the most, we can make a giant impact on the ultimate result. So that's one perspective of conservation that I've tried to carry on. And I currently work as an inspector, and I try to help homeowners identify how to make those optimizations to their home so that they can live in a place that is safe, a place that is efficient, and a place that becomes home to them. In the same way that we have seen the challenges that have been presented to us in recycling, in carpooling, I present one more challenge to you in the one thing that each one of us can do as individuals that would have the most impact on the environment, and that is our diets. So I present to you the challenge to look into and consider a plant-based diet. And if you have any questions, I'm in Rochester, I'm in the community, and I'll be happy to help. And now I'll open it up to the panel so we can answer some questions as well. Thank you.
It's a little bit easier with our live stream for us to read your question to our panelists and then have them respond that way. So if you have a question already written, wave it in the air and we'll come and grab it from you. Or you can take a bit of time to just write your question real quick.
Our first question is for Chloe. What strategies were used to get parishioners on board regarding environmental impact and emissions?
There we go. Okay. So that's a good question. I unfortunately don't have a great answer because it happened to be that while I was working on my thesis, a different parishioner sent out an email saying, hey, I'm starting a Laudato Si circle. Does anybody want to join? And I immediately emailed back and be like, hey, I do absolutely want to join. And so I guess that would be kind of my biggest piece of advice, is to get some sort of creation care ministry started in your parish. Find the people at your parish who are also interested in the same topic, and then you can get together, you can learn together with, for example, a Laudato Si book study, and you can talk about, what priorities might you want to focus on for your specific parish. And then with more people, you've got more, volunteer power and more, and with an official group, you might have more kind of authority, I guess, when you approach the parish council or the finance council or the priest or whoever to start discussing these ideas.
This is sort of a general question, so I would invite any or all of you to respond to this one. During your years of educating or advocacy, is there an experience of awkwardness or hostility that we might find inspiring or insightful? An experience of awkwardness or hostility that we might find inspiring or insightful.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was on. I think one of the myths that's out there is that faith and science don't mix. And I think that one of the things to keep in mind as Catholics is that the Jesuits had the Pontifical Academy of Sciences going on in about like 1510 or thereabouts. And so there's really, if you look on the website, and there's the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academies of Social Sciences. And nobody gets on either one of those panels unless they're laureate level scientists. And I think that that's one very simple way of answering that question. And again, to think in terms of, well, what do we know from science? What do we know from theology? What do we know from spirituality and so on? I think there's very different ways that we can parse all of those different ways of knowing, but yet, where does it all come from?
Yeah, I really appreciated your response to that because I think sometimes we can get stuck in our own ways of knowing things and become closed off to other ways, but they all bring a different perspective. And in the end, we end up coming to the same conclusion, being concerned about the environment or something, and that brings us together regardless of how we got there. Sort of maybe a challenging experience that I have come across. I've been very fortunate to have very supportive people around me. But I do recall in my capstone course I was taking as a senior in college, explaining some of the research that I had been working on, and my professor told me, I just don't really think that what the environment needs right now is a chemist. And so I took that upon myself to prove him wrong in every way. So I ended up making my entire capstone about why the environment needs chemists and why we need to understand the chemistry going on. So maybe a little bit motivated by spite, but I think it inspired me to look a little bit more deeply into why I was doing what I was doing. So you can take that and motivate it, and use it to motivate you to find some other purpose behind it.
So this question is for Jaime. There's actually two questions that would be related to your challenge for us. First is, what is a plant-based diet? But second, would you elaborate on the environmental effects on the environment caused by modern days beef and dairy industries? And comment on how Catholics can unite their fasting activities with meatless days.
So, thanks for the question. A plant-based diet and why and how it affects the environment. Just like how electrical engineering became the one little thing that could have the biggest impact, the impact that the meat-producing industry as an industrial process and the dairy industries, because they rely so heavily on reducing the natural fields and the way that the impact is having on different parts of Central and South America, for example, in just deforestation in general to try and replace parts of the forest for a low-cost meat-producing factory or a dairy-producing factory. Those are kind of the environmental impacts, and also the methane levels that are produced by cows and the conditions in which these animals are in the facilities that they're kept. So those are some of the environmental impacts that they have. In addition to that, there's a transportation of the products to the place of consumption. That's another part of the equation. But in reality, when it all comes together, you cannot fix one part without fixing the other. We also have the physical, the medical health effects that that type of diet has on us humans. Like I said, optimizing for the design, we were not designed to be consuming large amounts of meat and dairy the way that we are today. As far as what does the diet entail, it will be a diet free of meat, dairy, and eggs. And there's always tolerance. So just like we saw in all the stories of the Bible, that whenever there's a big celebration, they would have a goat brought up. There's probably a 5 to 10% tolerance, whether you want to make that adjustment in your life to have that special occasion when you would have a product of that sort. So it's not a matter of being totalitarian, it's knowing that there's a balance that we were not designed for.
I just want to support the whole piece about the beef because that's what I was talking about in Colombia. There are acres and acres of natural Amazonian forests that are being taken down so that the cattle can be raised. And then not only do they have to change that part, but they also have to go into the soils and add chemistry and different things like that. So it's a just a unstoppable kind of cycle.
Thank you. All right. Next, maybe for Amy, but open to any, how do we engage those who may have the tendency to even obstinately contest the scientific data manifesting the environmental crisis?
So thank you for that question. It is an extremely challenging thing to come up against, right? I don't think anyone likes to feel challenged, especially when it's something that you feel very strongly about, right? As a scientist myself, I've looked at a bunch of this data, and so I find it to be very trustworthy, right? And so if someone comes at you with sort of, it can almost feel like a personal attack, right? Like, oh, how could you believe something like this? And I think probably the worst thing that you can do is be defensive about it, right? You need to come at it from a place of curiosity. Like, what about it is making this person doubt the data? What aren't they trusting, right? And that opens the pathway to a conversation, right? Is it they just don't like that there's, this intergovernmental panel on climate change they see as this big mysterious thing where maybe there's, they don't necessarily know that they can trust the people that are on there, right? So we can start a conversation about, okay, how are people chosen? How do people get onto this? What sorts of data do they look at, right? So it really comes down to keeping an open mind about what is that person, like what are their concerns actually coming down to? Because my experience is most of the time you can find common ground with that person. And the goal of that conversation is not, I'm gonna change your mind right now, right? The goal of the conversation is let's connect as humans, right? We all have things we care about. We can find common ground there, and then we can work on from there to build a dialogue that's actually productive. I think, especially these days with, reels on TikTok and Instagram, all those things that get a lot of engagement, it's to make you angry. And so all we see is people just being angry at each other, but most of the time it doesn't come from a place of malice for most people. It comes from a place of something is not there. Some trust is lacking, some knowledge is lacking. It's just a matter of finding where that is.
The other thing that I've experienced is that people are just overwhelmed. And so part of it is to break down to maybe a small case somehow, if you can, to just simply say, science can tell us how. Theology can maybe help us understand why. God loves us, God created. So some of that kind of language, and again, I agree 100% with what you said. It's very difficult because usually there's something kind of bigger behind the question.
Yeah, so those were really great answers that actually asked the question, but I also just wanted to add, like, kind of depending on the context, especially because, like, my work tends to be more practical. Sometimes it can be also effective to be like, okay, well, we can put the science to the side. That can be a conversation for another day. But do you know how much money you will save if you if you replace your light bulbs with LEDs and, like, switch to a more drought-resistant grass and, like, don't cut your grass or don't water it, or if you shop secondhand, or if you stop buying plastic junk at Target, like, I find you can, like, a lot of times, like, that's where you're going to make the most headway, is you start with, like, okay, how is it going to benefit you to care for creation? If you're not prepared for that, you know, like, scientific debate at that time.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, is that we have the science in front of us, but a lot of people ignore it and just decide, yeah, you know, there's a science, but this is what we're used to doing, so we'll continue doing that. And it takes the mindset of creating a change and saying, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna do this, as unpopular as it could be. And that is how we create this level of sustainability, in which you cannot fix one thing without fixing everything else that is associated with it in the process. So it takes a little bit of commitment and a little bit of mindset that this is the right thing to do, and that's why we're doing it.
Continue to hear this integrated ecology. Dr. Amy, what is the smallest change that humans can do to influence atmospheric changes?
Another great question, another heavy hitter. So I don't think it's necessarily one thing, right? It's what seems small to one person might seem like a very large change to someone else. So I want to echo what Jaime was saying. Of course, changing your diet, right? Doesn't have to be 100%, but even switching out a couple days a week would make a difference, right? So it can be something as small as that. It can be something like, I'm going to write an email to my representative saying, you know, I'm your constituent. I'm extremely concerned about these things, and I'd like to see it be a priority in your legislative sessions, doing something like that. So I think those are sorts of little things that sometimes, you know, like writing an email or something, or making a phone call could be a less than 10-minute endeavor. That could be something very small. But again, it's going to look different for everyone. Maybe you want to commit to ride the bus to work once a week, or something like that. It's one of those things that it can be feel a little defeating sometimes, because if you're the only person doing something, it feels like it's not making a difference. But if everyone does one little thing, then it adds up.
I think you meant like groups. Seriously, that's another one that at least I think students have reported to me that work. You know, and that you hold each other accountable somehow. So in some ways it's kind of a game to start out with, but then later on it kind of can develop.
And then a kind of a follow-up question on that is, how do you convince friends to do eco-friendly changes that may not pay back in 5 or 10 years?
The change has to make sense. In order to convince anybody to make a change, it has to make sense. Financially, it has to make sense for the users that this is the right decision. And typically it does. For example, if I'm trying to convince somebody to install solar panels on their roof, they're saying, well, it's Minnesota, it's gonna be covered with snow for about 3 months out of the year. And I have to actually show the numbers and say, yes, it works. This is what the numbers show. And beside the fact that we have some of the most inexpensive electricity in the country, if it works at that level, it will work in other areas where power is significantly more expensive than here. So when we look at the economy of it, yes, it works. When we look at the benefits of it, yes, it works. Same thing with diets. If we're switching from a meat diet into a plant-based diet, the financial part is there too. It's going to be significantly less expensive to go into plant-based. But the cost per calorie is one thing, and then we're looking at how do we adapt to it? What are we used to doing? So the challenge is, yes, it works. Let me show you how. And that example is how we lead. We lead by example.
That reminded me of something that is very accessible. If you go to the U.S.-based Catholic Climate Covenant, one aspect of that is Catholic Energies. And their whole project is doing what you're talking about, but especially for schools and churches. So it might be something and I know that they've got resources there, but I like his explanation. That's great.
Our next question, things like large computer systems, servers, use lots of energy. What are ways we can respond to the recent push to use AI, a huge contributor to energy use?
The use of energy in part of the servers is already there, whether we use them or not. The servers is, for example, the IBM building we have right here in Rochester, the Big Blue, which is in Northwest Rochester, just south of Target. And that facility is one of the biggest facilities all under one roof. The entire basement of that facility is where the servers are. The servers generate enough heat to heat up the entire building in the winter. And that is how they're used, and that's why they're placed in the basement. In the summer, they open the doors, the cellar doors, so that the heat can go out into the air. So the design of how that is incorporated into our place of living is one way in which we can see that. So that the use of the energy that is on those servers is actually that dissipation of heat is used to actually heat up buildings. If that practice is used in other places where they have servers as well, that is something, a secondary use of that energy that is already being used and dissipated.
Thank you. This is another question for Jaime. On corporate manufacturers, where are we at with creating, achieving a circular economy, and what still needs to happen?
Manufacturing in a circular economy would mean essentially having a product go from being born to being used, to being reused, to being salvaged. So as I understand it, is how do we bring it from start to finish? And the one part that we're missing is disposal. Pardon me? Responsible recycling. And the part is in disposal. So when we see, okay, so what do we do? Is we're done with it, and I just had to empty out my childhood home, essentially my old bedroom, which still had tons and tons of toys that I couldn't get myself to get rid of because they're still useful, there's still life in them, they're just functionally obsolete. However, when we look at that, there's ways that we typically say, yeah, we can donate, but at the end of life of the product, it's gonna end up in recycling or it's gonna end up somewhere else. The part that it generates from the manufacturing perspective is essentially having, and it becomes more of a community type issue, having the producer be responsible for taking back the product. That would be bringing it all together, bringing it back to the place of development, or at least have the developer say, yeah, because we are not going to be there when the product is going to be disposed of 20 years from now, we will have this plan for disposal right at the beginning. So if there's a plan for how it's going to be disposed 10, 15, 20 years down the line, that plan can be incorporated and distributed as part of the product manufacturing. So if we're bringing a product from China, how is the company in China making sure that we're gonna have a way to send it back? Are they gonna take the product back, or is there more sustainable company that is nearby that would be willing to do so? And how can we favor that company that would be willing to do so? So it becomes more of a public policy type of question, but it becomes a national debate whether we should go that route or not.
The next question is to all panelists. What is the impact of plastics in your area of focus?
This is such a great question because this is something that we've only just begun to recognize as impacting the atmosphere. I think we're all probably pretty familiar with plastics being in the oceans and water systems, right? But we've recently found evidence over the past, I would say, decade or so, that microplastics also make it into the air. They are a part of the tiny little particles that float around. They get transported all around the globe. We find them at both poles. So they're here. And at this point, we don't really know what the impact is. So there's a lot of research being done right now just trying to get measurements. So we have some good data to look at, trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to impact the climate system? And beyond that, how is it going to impact ecosystems? So it's a great big question mark right now. It's a critical area of research.
Ministerial students need to know science. And that's part of the project that I was talking about, you know, when we talk about the dialogue on ethics, science, and religion, that there are so many ways that different sciences, you know, like if you're doing counseling, obviously psychology and some of the social sciences are more. But when you're talking about, you know, how do you run a parish and what are the things that you do, which we have a lot of priests that need to know this kind of stuff. So that they can listen to people like him, you know, and really ask some of those questions. And then just more generally, just how do you teach and how do you hold up the sciences and promote people that are knowledgeable and invite them into your conversations, because after all, the teaching doesn't do any good unless you practice it.
Yeah, so for my area of focus, I look at plastic at more kind of the like practical daily use level, and just trying to reduce waste and trying to reduce those plastics that are going to landfill or not going to landfill and making it into our, you know, forests, into our waterways and into the air. And so I just, you know, looking at, and it can feel like it's impossible to avoid them because you can't buy food without it being packaged in plastic. You can't buy a lot of things without it being packaged in plastic. And so I just always, I encourage people to kind of look at where they might be able to reduce their plastic. I get, like, instead of purchasing a stack of plastic cups, is that could those be used for, are those being used for something where you could use reusable cups or paper cups if they have to be disposable? I cloth diaper my kids to avoid the plastic waste of diapers because that's what diapers are made out of. They're made out of, like, that in order to be waterproof, they have to have plastic in them. And just stuff like that. So yeah, kind of on the more practical level, it can feel impossible to make your own contributions, but there are things that you can do, things you can change, and you can also learn about recycling plastic properly. Plastic can be really hard to recycle, but making sure that what you put in your recycling bin can go in the recycling bin. Every area is going to have their own rules, so make sure you know what the rules are, what can go in, and if it can't go in, don't put it in the recycling bin because it'll just damage the equipment or contaminate the lot, and it might end up getting the whole lot sent to the landfill. And there's programs like is it Trex? I can never remember what the company's name is called, but where you drop off your plastic bags at like the grocery store and they get made into that decking material. So kind of looking, if for the plastic that you can't avoid, looking into how to dispose of it properly so that you can avoid those later impacts on the environment.
My focus on career right now is mostly in housing. So I'll reshape that question to see how it fits on my area at the moment. And it has also become my passion as to what I think is an area that we should all be looking for, because it doesn't just affect us where we live, it affects our community, it affects other people around us. And there's a lot of talk, and this is something that affects, again, public policy, but everybody's talking about housing for affordable housing or housing for a specific environmental need. And there's two ways to create sustainability. We can go the high-tech route and require every house to have solar panels, or we can go the completely low-tech route and decide, yeah, we're gonna do housing that just doesn't have a dishwasher and doesn't have what we would consider part of our normal household, but that are not needed in order to make that housing really and truly affordable. At this case, I would actually change the entire theme of the conversation from being affordable housing to being housing for the poor. While the city of Rochester right now, and everybody who has driven around has seen everything under construction and everything being changed, there's also a lot of talk about creating more housing that is affordable housing, and it's not just Rochester, it's affecting all the communities in the area. I think that while the designs that we have for the Destination Medical Center have affordable housing in it, they don't have any housing for the poor, and the challenge is policy. So we have created our own red tape trying to make energy affordability and trying to create more energy efficient housing that we have forgotten how that affects housing for the poor itself.
How do you encourage change away from convenience when we are so busy?
I'll attack it. I just returned from Puerto Rico. I've been here for the last 23 years, and I just spent 2 months in Puerto Rico, and that was enough to bring me back to my roots, to realize that I grew up on a farm, and while it was a very small, very extremely small farm, it was still what would be considered a hobby farm. And that, yeah, it requires a lot of time and a lot of physical effort to be able to take care of the farm. When, again, looking at high tech versus low tech, it was extremely low tech, where you wash your clothes and you hang them out to dry, where you don't have a security system as a dog that is sitting by the door, where pest control becomes the cat. And when you have resources that are growing around you all season long, and you plan for the different seasons. So there's avocados for the early fall, and there might be star fruit for end of summer, and there might be mangoes in the early spring, and so on and so on. So it depends how we design our household to be, and if we design our household to be in a way that it supports us, yes. And yes, it's impossible to manage the daily occurrences, and yes, at some point we're going to end up in the fast food lane, and it's going to happen and it's going to be needed. But for the most part, if we have a plan and we design to have things be a little bit more doable the way that we intend them to do, it really takes a little bit of commitment, but it's all about availability. So if we're in a situation where what we have available to eat, is what we should be eating, it saves us from having to look elsewhere.
if what we, if we're always looking into to something like a menu, these are the places that we would like to go eat every day of the week. How can we make that at home? How can we bring that home? And how can we make it so that it's not necessarily a change that we have to encounter, that if we don't have the time to wait for the clothes to line dry outside or to hang them and pick them out later, what can we do about it? And we don't have to give up conveniences. Conveniences are there, and I think we can adapt with, and we don't have to go entirely low tech to be more energy efficient. We can have a mix of the two and still be able to enjoy our modern conveniences while still caring for the environment.
We have two final questions. The first is for Jaime. How did you turn into a master inspector?
Thank you. So I became a certified master inspector recently in February. That was in sort of way awarded to me at a national convention in Florida. So I went there for continuing education, and they just told me, the founder of the organization said, we need you to train with our mentors, because in your area you have been there active the longest without being sued. After so many years, you still have full 5-star ratings. And so we want you to train with the best, and you don't have to worry about renewing or continuing it. At this point, you are here to help train. So that's how, that was life-changing recently. But how I became an inspector to begin with, I retired as an electrical engineer 13 years ago, and I called our inspector to go inspect the property that we had purchased. And at that point he said, no, you retired and I retired too. You have been doing this with me long enough. Here's the name of my business. Here's where you go get certified. It's your time to go help other people. So I do this as a vocation. I do it as a way to contribute and help people, because it's not just a problem to get into a house, it's a problem to get into a house that is going to be a big challenge. And if you know what you're getting into, and if you know how to manage those challenges, you'll be able to succeed.
Okay, so this last question, thank you for bearing with us for a little bit over. This is for each of the panelists. What is something that makes you optimistic about the future for creation, care for creation? Something that makes you optimistic about the future for care for creation.
You're hitting me at a low week for optimism, so apologies for that. I guess that kind of in my day-to-day work at my job, as well as and some of my volunteer work, I see, I'm seeing more organizations that are, despite everything, still interested in measuring their greenhouse gas emissions and making commitments. And kind of for my own sanity, I have to be hopeful that they're going to actually try to achieve those. But I also see kind of a lot of work behind the scenes within the Archdiocese, kind of trying to get more momentum in the care for creation sphere in our state. And so I'm really hopeful that we're going to see more more and more grassroots change coming in down the line.
I think the fact that we're here is really inspiring and motivating to know that there's a good future for the care of creation. My experience in conservation started when I tossed a piece of paper and I watched somebody pick it up and carry it, and I followed that person until they found a trash can. And having found somebody who modeled that was impactful enough for me, to look more into it. If we can become a model for somebody else, that would expand tenfold. And that type of effect is what has me hopeful for the future of creation care.
There's a lot of things that I could name. I think students that I've had that are all over the world doing things. But also I think we have a lot of things going on in Europe and elsewhere in the world that are not cutting back on anything that they're doing for environment. We've got lots of science that's going on that's still not, in spite of grants being cut all over the place and things like that, scientists are not giving up. And so I think that there's ways that the knowledge is there, and it's a matter of where do we come to that precipice where we do one more thing and then things go the whole way. And I think we've seen that in other points in history. I'm very discouraged at a lot of points now, and especially when I think about some of the poverty places that I was describing earlier. Those people are absolutely destitute and desperate. And so that's where, if you get a chance to contribute to some of the Catholic organizations that are out there, or any other trustworthy kind of group that's going to these really poor places, they do need your money. They don't have any place else to go besides you. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It's very easy to feel discouraged these days. I'm one of those scientists whose grants have been cut for the work that I do, so it is very easy to fall into that pattern of despair, I think. But what gives me hope is that whether or not you're aware, we have saved the planet before. So I'm referring to the stratospheric ozone layer. When that was being, we're seeing, low points in ozone depletion, and that is obviously, devastating for all life on planet. And that was something that, what came out of that was a global agreement. Every country signed on to this agreement to phase out the chemicals that were causing this ozone depletion to occur. And it's still in the process of being phased out fully, but we're getting close. And so I need to have hope that, the things that we do have this larger impact. And I think we can solve these problems. We've solved really challenging ones before.
Thank you to our wonderful panel for your insights and sharing that with us, with those online, and your just your wisdom and the way that you have shown us that there is a mystery to goodness, and we're all involved in it, and we all have a responsibility for it. So if we could thank our panelists.